Hello YouTube, our favorite Electro Archon, the owner of You Shall Be Laid Upon This Statue, and the master of storing swords in her interdimensional booba space, Raiden Shogun, is getting a rerun in version 5.0. Now, in today's video, we will be talking about whether you should be pulling for Raiden Shogun in 2024 or not. Everything about her rerun, the good, the bad, and the ugly. At the time of recording this video, today is 19th of September 2024. Raiden Shogun came out a little over 3 years ago, and when she came out, she broke records, sale records, damage records, and records of your bank balance. Let's be honest, we all pulled for her. She was great, okay? But what exactly was the reason why everyone pulled for her? First of all, Raiden Shogun was funnily enough the first ever limited Electro character released after like 1 year into Genshin, which is kind of crazy. Also, she was the much awaited Archon of Electro. Now, Archons, while Genshin was in 2.1, were a really strong support unit. So Raiden Shogun, who can provide support and also a significant chunk of sub DPS, was a must-have for everyone back in 2.1. Now, let's talk a bit about Raiden Shogun's damage. Raiden Shogun generally depends on her burst to deal a majority of her damage. Raiden Shogun also gets a bonus damage based on the amount of resolve stacks she has while she bursts. Resolve stacks are the stacks that you get from bursting on your other team members. The more burst your team member does, the more resolve stacks you have, which you can see by this weird circle behind her back with an electro symbol on top of it. Moving on to the teams Raiden Shogun can be viably played in. Raiden National is one of her more popular teams when she was released. In this team, you use Raiden Shogun, Xiangling, Bennett, and Xingqiu as a core team dealing damage in terms of pyro, electro, and reaction damage in between. It's a great team, works exceptionally well in Spiral Abyss and other contents of the game. Another team comp that was very popular when Raiden Shogun came out was the Raiden Shogun Kujusara Electro Hyper Carry team. As the name suggests, Raiden Shogun was solely used as a hyper carry in these teams, and most of the time, Bennett and Kujusara were used simultaneously to buff Raiden's damage through the roof. For the 1% of population that still mained Eula back in 2.1, Raiden Shogun was a great sub DPS for the team. Now, in mostly Eula teams, Eula had a time period where she can't exactly not do any damage, so Raiden Shogun not only fulfilled the role of dealing damage but also fulfilled the role of getting energy particles for the entire team comp. So overall, a great addition to the Eula teams. So this would be what you call the early period of Raiden Shogun's release and her complete reign. Now let's move on to the middle period where Sumeru came out. With the release of Sumeru, we got introduced to a brand new element, the Dendro. Now, with release of Dendro, we also had brand new reactions. For example, Hyperbloom, Spread, Aggravate. Not gonna talk about Burgeon because Burning and Burgeon are not related to Electro, so these are the three major reactions that Raiden Shogun can technically contribute to. And surprisingly enough, Raiden Shogun was a great team member in Hyperbloom team comps. Her kit functioned in a way where her elemental skill always strikes the enemy or after the triggering attack is done. So therefore, it was always the attack that triggered the Bloom course in a Hyperbloom team comp, and surprisingly, with enough amount of EM on your Raiden Shogun and the proper artifact set, your Raiden Shogun could be dealing upwards of 40k Hyperbloom ticks. Now, in perspective of free-to-play teams, this was a huge deal. Hyperbloom came out to be the fastest team in some of the Abyss clears back in the days when Sumeru came out, which then brings the question in my head whether this was a crazy strategy by Hoyoverse to make sure Raiden is Dendro ready, or was this just a sheer dumb luck example where Raiden Shogun benefited from the release of Dendro? Because Raiden Shogun's team comps in the other reactions such as Aggravate and Spread, well, in Spread, generally, Raiden Shogun can be used as support, but I wouldn't recommend using her as a support because she has better needs or requirements in other team comps. And for Aggravate damage, there are always better characters who can trigger Aggravate better than Raiden Shogun, because Raiden Shogun has standard ICD in her bursts, so, well, which is about 2.5 seconds or every 3 hits. Now, let's move on to the next part of the discussion, whether Raiden Shogun is F2B friendly or not. In a single word, the answer is yes. Raiden Shogun's best team comps are Raiden National or Rational, or the Hyperbloom team comp. In both the cases, Raiden Shogun can easily be running with free-to-play friendly characters or characters that are basically given to you for free. For example, in Rational teams, her best team is Raiden Shogun, Xiangling, Bennett, and Xingqiu. Again, 3-4 stars you have had in the game since the beginning and are absolutely free. In a Hyper Bloom team comp, Raiden Shogun generally replaces Cookie, and the other three characters can be Xingqiu, Kole, and the Dendro Traveler. Let's say Hyper Bloom is not your jam and you want to go for constellations on Raiden Shogun. Surprisingly enough, Raiden Shogun actually has one of the best, if not the best C2 in the games. This constellation allows Raiden Shogun to step out of her boundaries of a sub DPS and tap into the realm of a DPS character. Remember that Hyper Carry team I mentioned before? Yeah, that team deals about 47% more damage. I did a damage comparison between C0 and C2 Raiden Shogun in a different video. The link is down in the description, y'all can check it out. Also, while we're on the topic, please consider subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying the video. It really helps me out, keeps me motivated to make videos like this for you guys. Now, let's finally answer the biggest elephant in the room. Should you pull for Raiden Shogun in 2024? The answer is, it depends. Well, for example, let's say you want to build a rational team. You're just starting out and you don't have a source of damage dealing and you probably want to depend on Hyper Bloom. Raiden Shogun is actually a great pick because she can fulfill the roles of a sub DPS and a Hyper Bloom enabler at the same time, so making her value quite a bit. Number 2, you are very much far into the game, you never exactly picked Raiden Shogun during 2.1 and you're wondering whether you should give the Electro waifu a chance or not. If you already are clearing Abyss, I wouldn't exactly say that Raiden Shogun is a must in clearing Abysses, so you can technically skip her. Now let's move on to the third kind of people, the husbando enjoyers. Well, in that case, you should not be watching this video because you really don't need waifus in your team now, do you? And number 4, if you're a waifu enjoyer, what are you doing watching this video? Go pull for Raiden Shogun right now. What are you waiting for? Now finally, let's move on to the Abyss usage rate. With the release of newer characters in version 3.0, 4.0 and 5.0, Raiden Shogun has definitely seen a downward trend in her Abyss usage rate. Back in 2.1, Raiden Shogun was used 81.5%, while in 5.0 she is used only at 34.6%. Now let me explain these numbers exactly what they mean. For every 100 people who use Raiden Shogun, back in 2.1, 81% or 81.5% of the people used her in the Abyss runs. However, in 5.0, for every 100 people who own Raiden Shogun, only 34.6% picked Raiden in their Abyss runs. At last, but not least, those are my thoughts on Raiden Shogun and her development as a character since 2.1 to 5.0. The decision is up to you whether you want to go for Raiden Shogun in 5.0 or not. At the end of the day, I always say this, if you really like the character, you should always pull for them. Don't let videos like this decide whether you want to pull for a character or not, even though the condition I made this video is telling you my personal perspective on Raiden Shogun as a character. Another very important thing I forgot to mention is that when Raiden Shogun actually came out, she never actually worked with Beidou. I still don't understand till this day what was the reason behind it. Well, technically I think I do remember it, but hey, if Electro waifus don't work with another Electro waifus, I'm kind of disappointed. But hey, that's about it. Also, Raiden Shogun really doesn't exactly have good later constellations. What I mean by that is that if you're pulling for constellations on Raiden Shogun, you should really go as far as C2 or C3 and stop before that. That will be all from my side. If you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and liking the video. It really helps me out a lot. Also, check me out on Twitch. I'm probably streaming right now. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Peace.